The Red Rag Riddle, Chapter 10. Wags does his part. Measure, pour, mix, bake. Measure, pour, mix, bake. After several days of hearing nothing more about the mysterious note or the criminal, things seemed somewhat back to normal. The students returned to the project of raising money for computers and the Springers. Mrs. Virtueson invited Christy, Miriam, Sandy, Racer and Pudge to make their baking headquarters in her kitchen. Pudge helped sprinkle flour on the cookie dough as well as on the floor, while Racer cut the dough into interesting shapes and sizes. I think I need to sample this. It may not be good enough to sell, Pudge said, sticking a glob of cookie dough in his mouth. Pudge, Sandy warned. Stop that. Huh? Pudge looked up. Christy giggled. Are your cookies ready to go into the oven, Racer? Mrs. Virtueson looked on and smiled. Racer nodded and handed over the cookie sheet. Mrs. Virtueson popped them in, and Christy peeked through the oven window every now and then to make sure they weren't getting too brown. I like lots of icing on my cookies, Miriam said as she squirted some fresh baked cookies and her dress with the messy decorating tube. I can make pictures and faces on these cookies, she said. Next came the gooey chocolate chip cookies, peanut butter drops and homemade brownies. Acey took a turn using the mixer until all the lumps were gone. Whoa, he yelled as Pudge pulled the metal blades up before the mixer had completely stopped. Oh, Pudge, look at the wall, and the cookbooks, and the counter, and the floor. Christy's voice got lower and lower as she put her hand to her mouth. Pudge sheepishly glanced around to see chocolate splotches decorating the kitchen. Don't worry, I'll lick them up, Pudge told Mrs. Virtueson. Oh, no, you won't, she declared before playfully tossing him a checkered dishcloth. Here, use this after you wet it in the sink. He repentantly accepted it and began cleaning up. Racer scraped the last of the cookies off the metal sheets. He could not seem to stop crumbs from flying to the floor. Next came the pies. Racer said he'd like to make pie crusts. What are you supposed to put into a pie anyway? He asked. Your teeth, Pudge grinned. Racer licked his lips. He had never made one before, but how hard could it be? What kind of pie are you going to make, Racer? Sandy asked. Oh, I don't know. My mother told me never to tell until after it was already cooked. That way her apple pie can become an apple upside down treat or a browned apple crisp, and no one will ever know the difference. Mrs. Virtueson laughed. So that's why your mum's such a good cook. I'll have to remember that, Racer. Thanks for the tip. Racer patted the dough down with his hands and used the rolling pin to make it flat. The dough was much stickier than he had thought. Not seeing another rag, he wiped the extra dough on his apron. Better than wiping it on my pants, he reasoned. He pulled the dough off the rolling pin, dusted it with more flour and scooped out a little extra to put on top of the dough. When he rolled it out again, he was proud of himself because the dough didn't seem quite so sticky this time, at least not on top anyway. He picked up the dough to place it in the pan, but somehow the centre of the dough didn't follow the edges into the pan. It stayed glued to the counter. He was holding a large donut ring that stretched further each second. "Aw," he moaned. By the time the first pie crust was placed in the glass dish and pinched around the edges, Racer looked like an angel wearing an apron. He was covered from head to toe in white flour. It had been a busy day. A mountain of cookies and brownies proved it. While the girls finished boxing up the goodies, Mrs. Virtueson made phone calls to let parents know the children were ready to go home. Acey zipped outside to get a bucket to clean the floor. While Acey was outside, however, Racer thought of a faster way to clean the floor and surprise Acey's mum. Shh, he motioned to the others. Tiptoeing over to the door and cracking it open, he knelt down and called, "Here, Wags, here, boy." Miriam paused. "I don't think that's such a good idea, Racer." Racer didn't listen. Good old Wags bounded into the kitchen, hungry for an afternoon snack. Never did he imagine such a treat. He skidded and slid from spot to spot, his tail making half circles in the flour. He liked the chocolate chip cookie crumbs and leftover sugar cookie dough the best. Suddenly, Mrs. Murchison and Acey walked back in. Uh-oh, the smudge of red icing on the end of Wags's nose gave him away. Even Mrs. Murchison couldn't help laughing. Wags, you look like a sundae with a cherry on top. She grabbed hold of his collar and pulled the unwilling pup to the door. Come on, Wags, get out of here before I have to put you on a diet. She turned back toward the wide-eyed children, staring at her. Now the rest of you can work up some elbow grease cleaning this floor. The cleaner is under the sink, Racer. I'll bring you a mop, Pudge. You'll have plenty of time before your parents get here. She smiled. They all understood. Way to go, Racer, Pudge remarked. Baking was work, but mopping up is even more work. We can take turns, Christy said. We needed to scrub the floor anyway after the mess we made, added Miriam. Mrs. McMurphy had agreed to deliver all the cookies to the booth the next day for the sale, so she took the cookies home with her. When Sandy's brother Bill came home, the unmistakable smell of cinnamon and brown sugar met him at the door and led him into the kitchen. The cookies seemed to be calling to him. He decided to eat just one. Heavenly. Then he decided to eat just one more. The next thing he knew, one whole package was gone. With his mouth full of cookies, Bill looked like a chipmunk. Sandy walked by and saw the crumbs at the corners of his mouth. Bill, what are you eating? The cookies for our bake sale? Sandy cried. Guilt was written all over his face. Bake sale? Now Bill remembered. Sandy, I'm really sorry. I know I should have asked before I sampled them, but they looked so good. Will you forgive me? Please, please? I'll tell you what, Sandy. Those cookies were so good, I'll pay for the ones I ate. In fact, I'll pay you double. Then you'll make twice the money you'd get if I hadn't eaten any of them. How would that be? Sandy kept looking at the floor. She really loved her big brother, and she knew forgiving him was the right thing to do. Slowly she said, I forgive you, Bill. The money was for the computer project, but now we've decided to donate it to the Springers. Now you have played a part in helping us raise the money too.